Hi everyone! Today I'm going to film the second of my paint-along demonstrations. I'm hoping that these are going to be perfect for people who are beginners to the world of pastel, as well as those who just want to improve their skills or learn some new techniques. So today we're going to keep it small, something that we can attain within 2 hours, and I'm going to let you know all the materials that I'm using so that you can work along too. So I hope that you enjoy this and learn lots from it. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to me here on YouTube for all my future free content. And also consider checking me out over on my Patreon channel. The guys there are making all of these videos possible. So I'll add links in the description below for those. So for the materials that I'm using, I'm working on the light yellow velour paper. But if you're working along with pastel mat or one of the finer grit UArt papers, you'll absolutely be able to work along. I also have my sketch already done out, if you can see. I also have a video on my YouTube channel showing you how I grid things out and create my initial sketch. And now I'm just going to transfer that onto the paper, all of which I've covered in other videos on my channel, so please do have a look around in the playlists. Also, the palette that I'm going to use, I'm going to restrict myself to just my animal selection of colours from Unison. I may use some pastel pencil along with it as well, but I'm going to just use these colours so that if you guys already have the set, or if Santa brought you a new set at Christmas, you'll be able to work along. You'll have all the colours that I'm going to use. So I didn't actually have an animal set sitting, as I've recently made a video showing you how I organise all my pastels in their trays, but I quickly picked out the colours from the 36 animal set, so that's them sitting there, and that's what I'm going to limit myself to. And the image that we're all going to work on is a nice, simple, well, I hope that it's going to be simple, picture of a dog sleeping. And if you want to freeze this frame in the video, I'll leave the photo here for a few seconds so that you can either use it to sketch from or trace from your screen, whatever you want to get going. And I'm working on 10 by 8 inches big. And just to show you, I have the girl here that we're going to be painting. This is Brocky, and she's one of my studio assistants. I do have others, but this is Brocky, very peacefully sleeping in the sunshine. So while she sleeps, let's make a start. So with my line drawing on my pastel paper, I'm ready to start the colour work. You're going to see me build up a bit of background colour, the out of focus rest of the dog, then a bit more detail in this area of the dog, will bring it all into focus hopefully, and also a nice gradient of colour with some shadows around where the dog's touching. And you can see that I've added a little bit extra to the composition from the photograph, just to give the dog's head a little bit more space. So let's make a start. So I want to block in a little bit of colour in the background. I'm going to have to keep it very simple because of the time limit. I'm hoping that I will get some kind of result within 2 hours. And it's a good experiment to do because it forces you to work quicker. I normally take the luxury of really taking my time, so this is a good exercise for me and for anybody. And it also shows you what's possible with this wonderful medium, because you can get such a finished result within a couple of hours. Obviously I like to spend anything from 8 hours to 80 hours on some of my paintings, very big ones. So this is a challenge for me to create a piece quickly, but I do it quite often at demos and workshops, and I really do like the experience because it makes you speed up, it makes you work much different to how you normally work, so that's a good thing to do. So I'm making use of the animal set only. This is lovely light BV7. I could just use one colour in the background, but the lovely thing about pastel is how it layers up. So when I add another touch of colour, you can still see the colour underneath, and especially when I come in and start to blend. And I would do this on other papers too, pastel matte, all the same technique for me, just to get slightly more interesting backgrounds. You can leave more texture if you like. Well, I may come back and alter it when I get more of the dog in, but for now I'll leave that. I'm going to block in some of the foreground area, and I'm going to start off with my black Faber Castell stick. I just want to strengthen this line of the dog in here. This is where I really want to create a nice bit of shadow. And I can continue on around a little bit. I'm not leaning too heavily, just trying to get a little bit of dark pigment along this darkest line of the dog where it meets the sofa or the chair. I'll come back in with other colours on top of this, but it's nice for me to just get a feel for where the shadows will lie. And over here has been hit by quite a lot of light, so it's not as dark over there. It's really dark where it recedes in to the bottom of the dog's cheek there. So just in at this point, going to add a little bit of cast shadow using one of my favourites, Grey 8. It's my go-to shadow colour. I seem to pick it up a lot of the time when I want a nice shadow tone. And just bringing a little bit more shadow around the base of this ear. And we get a nice little sense of the curve of the chair as it comes out, so I'm going to try and emulate that with the direction of my marks and how I blend it together in the end. So over here it's been hit more by the light, it's slightly warmer. Of course this is much too yellow, or it's a brown earth. But I will of course lighten this with my next layer, so I want to be sure to come in with enough warmth and contrast for the shadows before coming in with any of the lighter colours. So you're always thinking dark to light. If you're just picking up pastels for the first time, that's the first tip that will help you loads. So be brave with your initial layers, as long as you're using a pastel paper that can accept multiple layers. Then you should be able to build up the effect gradually, leaving those lightest colours for later on. So as I said, I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail on the background. You could sit for ages and get each little fibre on the chair. It's certainly possible to get such high finishes in pastel if you're going for super photorealism. that's certainly achievable, but what I want to do in this demo, especially for those of you just starting out and wanting to try some shorter projects, I want to show you that it's really possible to create something that looks pretty finished, but in a shorter amount of time. And often the trick with the backgrounds and the surrounding areas in portraits is to not put as much detail in it as you might think is necessary, because quite often it can distract from the main subject. So although I love painting backgrounds, it's a big part of my work, I try to make sure that the focus is still on the main subject and the background is simply there to complement. So you can often leave a background long before you might think it's finished, and later on when you've got the detail of the dog in, obviously you can tweak the background at that point. But often it's enough to create the effect. Less is more, as they say. So similar colours to what I used at the top part of the piece. Just keeping it very soft and subtle and quick. Most importantly, quick. So little areas like under the nose, I can come back and work more on the shadow in there and really tweak that when I get the nose in. Just blending it all nice and smooth. So just redefining where that ear disappears off. So all these same colours from the animal set. Quite often you'll be able to produce a lot of your background work using the set, and that's usually because a lot of the time I'm using similar colours in my backgrounds to what I'm using in the main subjects, just to create a bit of colour harmony throughout the piece. So you can really do a lot with the set. So I'm coming in with just a little bit of pure white up at this top area where it's been hit by sun. Once I blend it in, it will mix with the other colours a little bit. So a very rough sense of the surroundings blocked in. I'll make a start on the dog because I can always come back and work more on the background if I have some time at the end. The first colour I'm coming in with on the dog now, and I'm going to start back here, so again behind the face, always thinking from the background to the foreground. And I've got lovely rich creamy BE6. It's mostly Unison pastels that I use. So if I shout out any codes throughout the demo, it will be those Unison pastel codes. So this part of the dog is pretty out of focus, meaning I don't have to go into too much detail. There aren't individual hairs that I need to deal with, so I'm just looking for the darkest areas of shadow and being very quick at blocking in. I can see a rough direction of the fur in some areas, so I am trying to go with that. And the leg just comes around the top, roughly there. And it's really dark just down in there, and I really need to get this area in the background dark enough so that the whole face, the nose area, up the brow of the head, all of this really needs to pop out against the background. So going good and dark on this part will ensure that I get nice contrast. You can see just here along a little important ridge of the nose, and it's really dark just behind that. So that's what I'm looking for, those places that will help contrast the face nicely later on. And once I rub that, especially on the velour, it doesn't go everywhere, but it certainly smudges into the paper, so there's no pastel sitting loose on the surface of the paper. And you can see that it gives me a good base layer with a rough direction of some of the fur happening. So it's an interesting colour of dog to choose. Lots of rich browns, oranges, right through to the lighter end of the light tints, like the yellowy tints. It's a full spectrum of colour on this colour of dog. And I've painted her many times, and I'm hoping that that is going to work in my favour today. So you can see this back line of the dog. I'm really not going to worry about getting that to be a nice neat line. The softer that is, the better, to give the out of focus look. So lots of really rich browns, and in the animal set there's a good range of browns to cover all sorts of brown animals. Horses in particular tend to be different in every light that you photograph them in. So it was designed with that in mind, to give you a good range of these brown tones. Browns with more yellow content, or browns like this one, which is a red earth. So it's a lot more red content. Much richer, warmer browns. And you definitely need those with this colour of dog and many other animals. So really try to speed up your mark making. Be a bit looser with it, especially in the early layers. There's so much correction that you can make later on. But you can really afford to play about with these early layers. Add some really nice vibrant colours. I've included a few of those in the set as well. just to make you push your colour values a little more. Start introducing a bit more colour, because there's such a world of colour out there to explore. And there was definitely a point in my own art progression where colour really started to click more for me, and it really did transform my work at a certain point. So still just working very loosely, blocking in some of the main shapes that I can see. Not being too worried at this stage. I can still come back in and neaten up. And you really want to take the colour from the background and really rub it into the outline of your main subject. You almost want the colour from the background to overlap into the main subject a little, so that when you come to do this edge, it will have other pastel to go on top of. It won't be on bare paper. And it also makes sure that there aren't any gaps between your background and your main subject. And you can see that it's mostly the big sticks that I'm working with. You can get a surprising amount of detail with them before you even bother to break them or do anything with them. But later on, when I am trying to get some detail on the dog, I'll definitely make use of my smaller pieces of pastel and some pastel pencils as well. So still focusing on the darker colours. So there's a lovely bit of darkness just in here and in here. And just at the bridge of the nose there, I really want to enhance that. I really think I need to go darker down this crease in the leg, and to do that I'm going to bring in some black. I can of course soften this up again with my lovely rich browns, but I need it to be really dark in there. It's quite contrasted. So just using a black Faber Castell stick. I'll add links in the description below to where you can purchase all the materials that you see me using here. Also, if you make use of the links in my description through Jackson's Art, I am one of their affiliates and I'll get a little percentage from that sale, and I put that towards materials to experiment with in my videos, prizes for my patrons in the competitions that I run. So every little bit helps me out too. And just along the top of the tail here, before I bring in the lighter colours on the tail, just creating a little bit more contrast. So I just want to continue some of that darkness across the back. Really is very much in shadow over there, and that's going to help me out at making the face pop out. So you can see when I come back over those black areas with the nice BE6, it warms it all up again, but it gives it more depth having the black underneath. So I want to start and bring in a little bit of teal colour. Just letting the ends of the pastel marks do the work for me. Creating nice soft wispy marks. So really try not to start making smaller marks. Keeping all of my marks big and broad. And that's definitely a good exercise with the bigger pastels, get you into working with the big sticks. And it's just a matter of putting in some time with the soft pastels. You soon get a feel for holding them and for how much pressure to apply. All of these things, like anything, just come with a little bit of practice. And it's also important to find a way to work that suits the style that you're aiming for. Or maybe you don't know what style you're aiming for and you're just experimenting, that's fine too. Pastel's a great medium to experiment with. You can take things into a very finished and detailed place, or you can use it more expressively, more loosely. So I'm not going to do a huge amount more to this area. It looks so unfinished, unlike how my work normally looks. But that's the thing with out of focus areas. It's never going to look finished, and if you're working that area before your main subject, it's always going to look a little bit odd. The key is knowing when enough might be enough. And don't forget that you can always come back and work more at an area later on. But you can see that even in just a few minutes, you really can start to build up the 3D feel of something. So yeah, not too far off before I'm going to move on to the main part of the portrait. Often it's a good time to move on from a background when you're not sure if it's finished, because you really can come back at any stage of the portrait and work a little more on it if you feel it needs it. But quite often having that out of focus area in the background really adds to the, well, any detail that you manage to add in the foreground. So it can really help the overall effect. Just add a little bit of light hitting this side of the dog. So I've given my hands a bit of a wipe just to take some of the very darkest pigment off, and I'm gonna focus in now on the face area. And the first thing I want to do, I'm going to start and block in the darks in a moment, but the first thing I want to do is just re-establish this outline of the face, and I can really work on this contrast area before moving on to the rest of the face. So I'm coming in with very vibrant yellow, and I'm going to add a little hint of that colour around the edge of a lot of the face here. One thing about this coat is just how glowing it is, so at every opportunity I want my lower layers to have really nice vibrant colours in there. And just a very light amount of pigment down this bridge of the nose. I'm obviously going to go a lot brighter on this area. So the main focus is to get a nice sharp contrast between here and the bridge of the nose, and on up the forehead here as well. Just really frames the shape of the dog's face. So smaller pieces of pastel, little edges the whole way around. I can start to make some nice feathery marks, looking for the main shape of the brow. Not leaning too heavily at this stage. I want to be sure that I get the shape right first of all. Just making little short marks in the direction of the fur. And just very lightly blending that into the paper. And this is a tricky little area here. It really describes the eye on the other side where the eye socket is. So I will pay particular attention to that. For now I just want to get a little bit of the outline of the nose. Sometimes it really helps just to get the brightest area in quite near the start. Although I work dark to light, I will often add some of the brightest lit areas in early, as they help me see how dark I need to go sometimes in the other parts of the painting. So if this were a commission, every little shape and ridge down the nose would be really important. It's like features on our own faces. So that's the sort of thing that I will spend more time on if it's a commissioned piece and not a quick demo. Really work at getting the features of that particular dog just right, because that's how you can tell the difference between your golden retriever and someone else's golden retriever. You really know their face when it's your own dog. So I try to pay particular attention to lots of those small details on the face to really get a likeness. But today I think I'll just be happy to get it looking like a dog. 2 hours is a bit of a stretch, but let's hope it all comes together at some point. So that's enough for now, just to re-establish the shape. I'm going to go on and get some of the darker colours blocked in. So I'm looking for all those dark creases that are in the shadows. Just like with the body of the dog, I need to be bold with the first layers. And I really hope that the animal set helps artists just starting out with pastel especially to start seeing more colour and maybe pick up some colours that they wouldn't have thought of using. And then from there, part of the fun of pastel is adding to your colour collection. I'm guilty of that. But once you get into colour, it's really quite addictive. But it really is surprising what you can do with just 30 or so colours. If you've got the right colours for the job, that's really all you need. So I'm just starting to add in some lighter marks using my darkest brown here, and where the head recedes off over here is in a lot more shadow. So the light direction is really coming from this side. So this whole part of the dog is the brightest area. The ear and everything over here is not quite being hit directly by the light, so hopefully we'll manage to capture that today. So just looking at where this line of shadow runs up the nose, everything from about here on over this way is being hit by more light. So the ridges up the nose really describe the shape and the form of the dog. It's really important. And I chose to paint a sleeping dog because, well, one, you don't often get asked to paint a sleeping dog, and it's such a pretty picture at the end of it. I always like painting images like this, and I wish I would get asked more often as a commissioned artist, but Most people want to see the eyes, and I understand that because I love the eyes in a portrait. But today, to speed us up and to not have any real obvious features to deal with, I'm hoping that we can loosen up with the fur and really enjoy creating all the textures in the fur. So I'm really looking at the gaps in between the hairs. How dark is it in underneath that top layer? In some places it's really dark. So that's why I'm coming in with some of this BE6. And you saw how that worked out over in the body. My next layers really add the colour. And it's so dark down this cheek. But there's nothing too particular about what I'm doing at this stage. So I think I'll focus on the face area for a while, because not having pastel on this area gives me somewhere to lean my hand. So usually working from top to bottom, but also sort of from left to right. And it usually means that I've got a good place to anchor my hand. So in with a lighter brown now. And I'll continue what I was doing with the darkest brown. And especially down the front of the face here. I don't need the darkest brown for this area, so this mid-tone brown is good. And that centre of the face, that line that runs right up and over the top of the head. If you can really follow the flow of that, it's like the seam down the middle of the dog's face. And when you see it from different angles, it's going to run in a different way, but if you can really pay attention to that line, especially in your sketching out stage, that's going to help form the dog's face proportionally correct. So the shortest hairs are usually down the bridge of the nose and some other areas, but on the bridge of the nose especially. So even on the first layers, I'm just dotting in some marks there. It'll help later on when I try to create the texture of the fur on the nose. And then other areas like this, around the bottom of the eye, more sweeping. At each stage I'm really trying to look at the flow of the fur and where they come together from different directions. So really using these earlier marks to build the anatomy up of the dog. Each little change in the direction of the fur is because of what's going on underneath the skin, the muscle shapes. So changes in the direction of fur are really important. You can see that the curve of the head is really described by how fur flows up and over it. So I'm not looking at individual hairs yet, I'm really looking at the overall sweep of things. So I come in with some of the more rich red earth colours. Start to add more warmth to some of the shadow areas. I also want to bring some nice touches of vibrant colours, so using one of the very vibrant yellows from the set, like I used around the edge of the dog. So at this stage, I'm just going to work a little bit on the nose area so that I can clean up around this part of the dog. So just giving it a quick outline again. And for main features and things like that, I'll often pick up some pastel pencil. Browns and black are particularly useful, but I will use some lighter colours as well. So using that lovely dark navy colour from the Unison animal set to block in a bit of the nose. You'll often find this colour in noses, but you'll also find them in the coats of some brindle animals like German shepherds. Quite often you'll find a lot of that colour through their coat, so that's another really useful one. I also like making use of some dark purples for noses. So just blocking it in roughly. Just a little area of darkness around the top of the nose here. So like I said earlier, I can come back in and tweak at the background. I really shape the nose from the background. And I could use a soft pastel for this. Sometimes I'll use a bit of pencil like this. Really just working the shape of the nose from the other side and cleaning up that bit of background while I'm at it. Bringing in my BV7 to just add a bit of the reflected light on the tip of the nose and a little bit just down the top of the nose here. And if I dot it on quite roughly, it sort of looks like the little textured bits that you get on a dog's nose, so you don't have to go into a huge amount of detail there. It can look quite like it just by making a certain kind of mark. So just darkening down towards the bottom of the nose and in around the crease of the nostril here. And just a little bit of highlight in that corner of the nose. So starting to pick out a little bit more of the highlight down the nose, down the bridge of the nose. Always looking for little sharper edges on the pastels. But you can really see that in the initial layers I don't need to make my marks too precisely. So you can really go at it more than you think with the bigger sticks. So noticing how the light fans around and how the fur fans around the center of the face. And now just to help with the outline of the face, just before adding any lighter marks with the pencils, just going back into the background behind. So you can always work an edge from both sides. Use the colour behind things to shape the edge of the next item in front. So now I can really start to work on this edge while I've still got somewhere to anchor my hand. I can start to drag some of those lighter hairs out over the background. And especially over here where it's nice and dark behind, they should really stand out. So both a light yellow orange Faber Castell pencil and the lightest yellow. It's a bit like my grey 27 pastel. It's not quite white, it's got a nice yellow tint to it. So I have the equivalent of that in a pastel pencil, and it comes in very useful for areas like this. So just using the pigment that I've already put down, dragging little bits of it out over the background. And again, I can always come back in, shape it a little bit better. So that's already this area of the face starting to look a little better. I feel more that I can come this way now in the painting. That's the sort of area that I spend a long time working on, usually in my work. It's really key to building up the 3D effect. So again, let's have a look at the contrasts. Just how dark I can afford to go with this line in here. Don't think that just because you've got your darks in that that's you finished with them. I'm constantly coming back in, reassessing, measuring off other areas in the picture. And some of the darkest areas you'll always find are in the creases of ears, under chins. And of course in the corners of eyes. Let's start to get some of the contrast in around the eye area, because although it's closed, there's still a little bit of work to do just in the positioning of it. I'm just trying to get the line across the eye in roughly the right place. And noticing how it curves up into the corner of the eye there. Sweeps down a little bit. So just be careful if you've transferred your image. It's easy to lose your lines. And sometimes having sketched it out from the start does give you that extra relationship with the proportions. So if you can, make sure you have a go at drawing things out. Even if it's using a grid, you're still testing the proportions, having to look and measure with your eye. The grid's there to help, yes, but it's still a really good exercise. Let's start to bring a bit more vibrance into the coat. So a lot of the most vibrant areas seem to be more in the shadows, so where the light's directly hitting the dog, it goes more blondey sort of colours. But in these areas in here where it just comes around the shape of the dog's face and into the shadows, you really get a lot of deep vibrant oranges in there. So up over the top of the head starts to get a little darker as it recedes out of the light. Just continuing that ridge up the center of the head. So I just paused the camera there for myself and took a walk away from the piece, stood back a bit of a distance, and I thought, oh no, I'm only joking, it's not too bad, it's going okay. You always feel better if you get up and walk away from it. I advise all of you to do the same in all of my workshops. I'm always telling everyone to get up and have a walk around. Come back to your piece with fresh eyes and see what you need to do. I also have a mirror behind me. Quite often when I get up, I'll glance around at the piece in the mirror, and just seeing its mirror reflection sometimes points out the glaringly obvious that you couldn't see a second before. So I'm going to block in a little bit of the ear. I'm very conscious that I haven't started this area, so let's get a bit of it blocked in at least. I'm going to be extremely loose on the ear area. Hopefully show you how you can create such a mess of hair, but without having to paint every single hair. But just like before, I'm looking for the areas like in this crease of the ear, it's really dark in there, like really dark. So that's the first thing I go for. Looking for those really dark creases. And again, it's with the black Faber Castell. I could use my Unison black here, but I'm really trying to not fill the paper too much. I just want as little pigment on the paper as possible here, and just using the sharp edges of this stick to map out some of the curves of the hair. I did to a certain extent in my initial sketch, but I do leave a good deal of it for this part because I'm not planning on doing every single hair. I really just want to get the overall effect of it quite quickly. And I've just checked my time as well. I think I'm just over the halfway mark in my time, so that's not too bad. I was convinced I was about 1 hour 45 minutes into this already. Time always behaves very differently when you're painting. I completely lose track of time usually. So like before, I'll be coming in here with my nice warm browns and rich oranges, but it really is totally in shadow over here, so I'm giving that black a good rub into the paper. So really this is like the darkest area almost in the whole painting, apart from over in here. So really got to make them as dark as they need to be to contrast all those lighter colours around them. So this hair just on the back of her neck, and again it's a little out of focus back there, so just a matter of blocking this in quickly. Don't need to be too particular about it. But again, it's quite dark back there, which is going to help the lighter colours of the ear stand out in front of that. And maybe just a little flick of some highlight colour back there as the top of the hair catches the light. But it can really be quite loose with that back there. It's not going to come into focus. The hair of the ear is going to come up over the top of it. I really just want it to be dark enough in there to contrast the lighter colours on the ear. So I'm looking for some of these strands of hair that run down and how they come out at the top. And how that seems to run into the face at that point. So many little areas on one face where things join or change direction. And even when working at pace, I'm trying to notice as many of those things as possible. So I'm just looking for the dark gaps in between the hairs where I can put some of this dark brown in behind. And I'm really not going to worry if I get this 100% correct. Every photograph I take of this dog, her ears look different, so it's really not her defining feature that every hair has to be sitting exactly how it was in this photograph. So I am trying to notice all the nice sweeps of the hair. I certainly can't make it up any nicer than it is in the picture, so I'm definitely letting that guide my marks. But it's not the end of the world if it doesn't look exactly like how it does in the photo. So let's get a little bit more work done on the face. Bringing in some more slightly duller browns on this side of the face. We're in the shadows over here, so just darkening it down a little more. Using the edge of the pastel and fanning it around.
Don't forget, I've still got no highlight colours anywhere on this part of the face yet, so my lighter colours, I'll put a lot more effort into the shape and the flow of the marks. But with these earlier layers, I can really just dab it on and try and angle the pastel so that it makes the mark in the right direction. And then longer marks, of course, up on the top of the head where the hair is a bit longer. So really alter the length of your marks for where you are on the dog. So it really is possible to make use of nearly all the browns in the set on this one dog. Dappling on different colours, adding extra layers, all of that adds to the realistic and thick effect that you want to get with the fur. So just starting with some lighter colours to this, if you can see it, is very light BE. Starting to bring a little bit of mid-tone or highlight and suggest some more of the direction of the fur as it comes up and across the head. And this is slightly more muted for over this side of the face because of course we're over in the shadow side. So I don't want to use any of the colours that I'll use down this part of the dog over on these shadow areas. I can really bring in some little vibrant splashes of colour now as I start to work more the mid-tones. Really looking for areas catching the light nicely. So really not leaning hard there, just trying to get a little bit of that colour on the paper. So let's start and look a little more closely at the eye area. Starting to pick out some of the highlighted fur surrounding the eye. And that will really help me start to get a sense of the shape of the eye socket. So I might just use some pastel pencil now, just to shape what I've put down here a little better. And you'll see I can really start to add a good bit of detail with very few marks. The main basis of it is down there with the soft pastel, and it's just a matter of coming through and picking out little bits that you want to enhance with the pencil. So I'm really just trying to judge how bright I need to go above and below the eye. So I'll just strengthen up in around the eye and then add some of the highlights that are going to help that area come to life. So just a little piece of my BV7, trying to catch that upper lid where it's catching a little bit of light. And also down in the corner of the eye, we'll often get a little bit of moisture and some little highlights around the corner. So just looking at the direction of the eyelashes, dragging them down. And that's the eye starting to look a bit better now. So a bit more blocking in still to do in certain areas where I haven't really paid it much attention, so let's get on and get the rest of the face blocked in. Get some highlights on and then we'll see where we're at. So I can see that I need to go darker with some parts of the face, and also to start thinking about where the dots for the whiskers go. I've got 1, 2, 3 along there, roughly, and another little 3 coming from the nose in that direction. And just looking at how they curve from the bottom up and around the face. But I need a little bit more contrast just down this part of the nose. And so I'm darkening here a little with my BE6. Such a useful colour, this one. It's one of those colours that I may well use in absolutely every painting I do. And I'm really trying to judge if I've gone dark enough everywhere before coming in with the main highlights. If I haven't gone dark enough, I'm not going to create the nice lighting effect that I'm hoping for. So just using this lighter orange, my BE11, really lovely vibrant colour. Making sure there's a little bit of that dotted right through that whole section. And just while I have this in my hand, let's get a little bit of the ear blocked in with some other colours. Then I'm going to come back in with some highlight colour for the face. I really don't have to be particular with this part. If I have time, I'll try and neaten some of it with pastel pencil. Just looking for the main shapes that I can see, forcing myself to look quickly and try and get it down with as little as possible. So now with some of the lighter colours, like with the edge of the face, just picking out some of the brighter edges down the ear. So again, just letting the pastel do the work for me here, creating nice soft edges towards the ends of my marks. So just starting now to pick out some of the highlights on the rest of the face. So that may be round in shadow, but it's still a highlighted area, which is why I'm using a more muted highlight colour. Just picking out that highlight on the cheek. Also, as we come up and across the top of the brow and where it comes over to meet the ear. Again, just keeping in mind the direction of the fur, how it fans around the shape of the face. So now it's all about looking for little areas of highlight, hoping that I've got enough of my dark colours down to help these layers really bring it into the 3D. And you can see just how many layers I like to work in. The more layers the better. Each layer nice and thin so that you're not filling the paper up too soon. But it's the many layers that give you interest in the painting, texture and believable depth. So if you're just starting out in pastel, my best advice to you is to get your pastels as used and as dirty and broken as possible. It's the best way to learn. Just tackle everything. Don't be afraid if it doesn't work out first time. There's definitely a learning curve to this, like with anything. But the best way, like with anything, is by doing. So you really got to put some time in with the pastels, get a feel for them. And also not to worry about getting them dirtied or broken. That's exactly what they're made for. They're made to be broken, they're made to be used. They're going to last you ages. Especially if you're not using one of the more sanded papers. They tend to go through your pastels a little quicker. But you're going to get so much use out of your soft pastels for many paintings worth. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. Sometimes that's the thing, you get yourself some nice high quality materials to work with and then you're too scared to work with them. So you gotta just crack on. And the more practice you put in, the more natural they'll feel in your fingertips. So just a few more things to do to the face before I tackle the ear properly. So firstly, coming back in with a little bit of this lovely vibrant orange, just to add a bit more vibrance to certain areas. Sometimes as you work the layers up, it tends to dull down a little bit, so don't be afraid to come back in with some vibrant splashes of colour. Little marks just dabbled over the top of things. Really accentuating little areas that are glowing in the light. So I'm really trying to keep my marks nice and loose, not trying to get into too much detail. But then for areas that I do want to accentuate things, you can see how easily manipulated the pastel is. If I want to come back in with some pastel pencil, just start to work into some areas a little more. just noticing a little area here where I can pick out a little more highlight. I don't want to go too bright, but just this little patch below the cheekbone. But again, keeping all of my colours over on this side, those lovely mid-tones and rich colours, not letting my highlight colours get too bright. Again, I feel I can push the dark area in here just a little bit further. It's going to really help when I do this edge of the ear. Like over here, and getting this nice contrast for the face. I want a similar effect over here with the ear. So just making these little marks out into the fur, in the direction of the fur. And I can smooth that all in. It really is particularly dark just at the point where they meet. So I can afford to lean a lot heavier in there. And then just to neaten up this area in front, we've just got where the light is hitting here. And I can use this now to sort of shape the fabric of the sofa. And that should naturally create a bit of shadow as it comes around the corner here. And also create that little bit of shadow area just in under the nose. And just to really work on making the dog's face look like it's really sunk into the fabric a little. And then you can use the brown pencil just to go around and strengthen a few areas up. But again, I don't want to get into too much detail, so I'm going to try and stop myself from doing too much else with the pencils. Perhaps just a little bit before I add the final bits of highlight up the front of the forehead. Just to pick out a little bit of definition up here again. And as this sweeps across the top of the eye. But I don't want to add too many pencil marks in, because that starts to get very laborious and you end up having to do it right across the whole picture. And I'm really trying to speed the process up here, so really trying to avoid too much pencil and just keep going with the soft sticks. And these top layers where I'm adding my highlight colours, I'm really trying to think a little more about the marks that I make, so I'm a little bit slower at this stage, really trying to take my time with the marks, consider them, whilst at the same time trying to make them look quite random, so I don't want them to look too uniformed. I'm just continuing some of the highlight up the front of the face. Trying to keep all my marks nice and soft. So we're going to get onto the ear. And hopefully I'll be able to capture some of that in quite a short amount of time, as I imagine I'm coming up on the 2-hour mark. I'm too scared to check, I'm just going to keep working furiously. So just bringing a bit more warmth up over the top of the head. You tend to notice little areas that need a bit more work as you move around the picture. There is an order to how I work, but I do like to work as much of the picture together as possible. It makes it easier to compare certain parts. So let's really strengthen some of these dark areas again before starting to come in with any of the lighter colours on the ear. So in here really is dark. So we're going to afford to be pretty heavy-handed in there. And also over this other side. So I'm really scoring that into the paper, trying to get on as dark as possible. And similarly over here, just searching out any little dark, often diamond shapes or ellipse shapes. Just trying to get in any bits of contrast I can add to help with the next layers. Now that I've got it mapped out a little better, I can be a bit more confident at blocking in some areas. Constantly glancing over at the photo reference. As I am the whole way through the process. So really the lighter layers here are going to do all the work for me. I'm really just mapping out the way for them. So let's start and pick out some of these highlights and how they sprout out from where the ear starts. And again, I don't have to be particular with this. I can come in and neaten up. Just trying to get the overall flow. And it almost helps to have a little bit of a waver to your hand. Just creates a little bit of the wave in the hair. Particularly useful if you're painting a chow chow or a dog with curly hair or with wet fur. So many different types of fur to paint. One of my favourite things to paint. If you're interested, on my Patreon channel I have a full catalogue of pastel tutorials, and I tackle lots of different types of animals, but especially a lot of dog breeds, as it really is a master class in all sorts of different types of fur, colours, textures. Dogs are a great way to learn how to paint all sorts of animals. So using that rich red in the areas that I know are going to be in the shadow. I'm just trying to fill in as much of the paper before coming in with my lighter layers. Pastel always goes onto the paper better when there's a little bit of pastel underneath. So you want your top layers to have a little bit of pastel underneath. So the muted colours staying more over in the shadow side, but a little bit of vibrance down the ear as well, where it's catching the light. So I'm just going around trying to fill in some of the gaps where I can see some of this colour glowing out of. Bit by bit, the jigsaw of it kind of comes together. Picking out a few little prominent areas that I really want to include. Doesn't even matter if I don't quite get them in the right place. It's just using the ideas that are within the photo reference. So again, using this more muted colour. Really starting to be a bit more precise with my marks, choose where I want them to go. Try to create some of the nice waves that happen in the hair, and then after that I can take my pastel pencil and really start to work some of these hairs. To however finished I want, I can really work the edges. So bringing the ear up over this area at the back. So it's starting to come, and it will help once I start to get some of the lighter colours in now. So looking for the main sweep, that big blonde bit that comes down. And it sweeps sort of in here, just searching for the path of each little strand. And these parts come down to meet it at this point where it turns the corner. So each little part, I'm just looking for the journey of the fur where it comes out of. And try and follow it around with my marks. So I don't want to go too heavy-handed with this lighter yellow. This is A7, I believe, which I've used a lot over here. Really just some areas on the ear that are really catching the light. And quite often it won't be the full strand that needs the bright highlight. Often it's just the ends of the hairs. Try and find a little sharp edge on the pastel. But I'm not even too concerned if my marks are a little bit too broad to be individual hairs. Remember, that's not my aim here to paint every hair. As tempting as that always is to me, it's hard to let go of detail when it's something that you really enjoy. But it's also good to know that you can get a result from something quite quickly as well. And this is really fun for me because normally I'm slaving over every little detail in a portrait, so it's a lot of fun just to be able to let go a little bit and enjoy a piece. So again, using a little bit of pastel pencil. Just to start to shape things into place. I'm just working each little part at a time. Try not to get overwhelmed when you look at an ear or an area of fur like this. Just break it up into smaller areas. Try and section it off a little bit. So again, just looking for some areas that I could add a little bit more of a vibrant touch with this colour, bring it on through the painting. So we're getting there, just some loose ends to tie up in the ear. Start to join some places up. And I'm not really saying too much during this part because part of the time I'm breathing pretty slowly, trying to make these marks good ones because they're the top layer. And it's quite tricky to talk at the same time. Pastel's great because you can rework something, you can correct to a certain degree. But of course it's great if you can just get it to go on nicely first time. So anywhere that I want to really make it a little brighter, I can lean a little bit harder. That's not the sharpest piece of pastel that I'm using either. Just trying to keep my marks broad, filling in more space with each mark. So now that I've got the basic structure of all the areas of the ear in, I can go around, try and liven it up a little with some colour. Just trying to find how this curves around. So it's getting pretty close. Again, if this was a commission or something, I'd be spending ages on the next stages now. This would be me through the first couple of stages and into my tweaks and refining. But you can see that even at this stage, you can get a pretty nice picture from it, and it can look to a certain degree pretty finished. And what I always like to remind people as well, when you're looking at a picture on a wall, you're usually not standing right up close to it. And you're going to notice that when you paint something loosely, it looks really good from a distance. You get such a nice effect from across a room. And that's often how you're going to view paintings in a house or in a gallery. So it's good to consider how they look from a distance, as well as how much detail you can pack in for the up close encounter. But it's really good to consider the effect they have from across a room. And I think that's why I love the Impressionists' work so much. They've taught me a lot in how less really can be more, and I find it difficult to incorporate that into my own work. I'm always struggling to not paint more detail, so this kind of exercise definitely helps. And hopefully I will be filming a lot more of these. Be sure to subscribe to me here on YouTube if you haven't already, and you'll get access to all my new material. Lots of free content here on YouTube. So perhaps just some final tweaks with a bit of pastel pencil, just to try and grab a last bit of detail. I definitely could spend a lot longer on this. There's so much detail in this one ear alone. But it's also nice just to try and capture it quickly. I can hint at a little bit more detail just around the areas that really matter at the edges. I don't want to go over every bit of dark area and make it look really uniformed. Just picking out a few here and there just to add a little contrast back in. For example, with some of the weaves over here, I can just use the pencil to accentuate the shape of those a little bit. Just picking out the odd area to accentuate. And it's enough to do that and let the viewer's eye sort of make up the rest. It's surprising what your eyes can make up and believe that the detail is there when it isn't. So just using a few nice sharp pieces of the vibrant yellow. Just to pick out a few sharper hairs here and there. And I think I can pretty much call this done. I'll probably sit down and do a few more tweaks to it another day. And it's sort of at a fun stage now where you can sit just blobbing some bits of colour on here and there, having a bit of a play with it to see what effects you can get. So I hope that you have enjoyed this. And just the final few flicks for some of these eyebrow whiskers. Forgot to add them in earlier, so just add a few hints of that.
So that's it, and I hope that you've enjoyed this paint along demo and that you'll definitely come and subscribe here on my YouTube channel, and also if you can, consider checking me out over on Patreon, as you'll be helping me make lots more videos just like this. But until next time, happy pasteling.